apply or to enforce that Article 27. And so it was really um, difficult for him to actually enforce that article because immediately the American companies and the American government pushed Obregon into not implementing that article on them. And so he gave certain, how do you say, like certain advantages, right, for them so that their investments would remain intact, right? And that basically that's what Tratados de Bucareli were about. The fact that he allowed the American companies to keep on exploiting um, the Mexican resources without having to uh, pay taxes or more taxes or without having to respond to what the Article 27 was trying to do, right? And that's Álvaro Obregón. As I was saying, he is criticized by many, but also he is justified by many in the sense that he got the US recognition, and that kind of allowed Alvaro to have a little bit of independence in other matters of foreign policy, because since he did not enforce that Article 27 on American companies and on the American government remained um, uh, at peace, or very tranquil when Álvaro Obregón enforced or implemented other policies in foreign policy regarding, for example, conflicts and other kinds of things. So the U.S. remained, you know, quiet about that because they already got what they wanted, which was not paying taxes, not giving up the resources that they were exploiting in our country. And so that was a pragmatic decision, right? I don't know if anybody has any comment before we start with the team. No? Okie dokie. So here we go. And so Mariana, you guys go ahead. You starting with Lázaro Cárdenas, right?
Yeah, we're gonna talk about those years.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, you go ahead. I'm not gonna say who starts and who finishes this time.
All right. So in that case, I'm gonna start.
Mm-hmm.
No, no, no. All right. So we're team number one. We're gonna be talking about the Mexican foreign policy, starting in 1934 and ending in 1941. These are mostly the years that Lázaro Cárdenas was president, so we are gonna focus mainly on what he did and what he said. So let's begin. Mariana, can you go to the next slide, please? All right, so here we have, I'm going to give you a brief introduction into the topic so you know kind of what we're going for. So, when President Cardenas came to power, one of his major challenges was to uphold the 1917 Constitution because he had to grant Mexico better political, economical, and social conditions. One of his main goals was to confront the petroleum industries because they openly defined the Mexican government. Um, and one of his main goals was to, um, sorry, in matters of external policy, one of the main objectives was to keep a neutral position in the face of the war that was closing in. At this time, it was very obvious that we were going to have a Second World War, and Mexico had to stay neutral because That was a very important part of our foreign policy at the time. Um, he had to reject intervention from foreign powers, and he really wanted to give this nationalistic sense to external relations. He wanted to defend the sovereignty of our territory and our natural resources. During this time, Mexico was really favored by both external and internal conditions, which bettered its capacity for international negotiation. We had political stability, economic growth, social cohesion, and all of these things really made the country stronger. We also had the good neighbor policy, which was established by the US, and this really created an international environment that made things really easy for Cárdenas when he was a president.
Okay, so can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, so in the last slide, we saw that in 1936, Lázaro Cárdenas issued the expropriation law, which basically started, which was an important decision that takes the president. And with this normative, the Mexican government had the right to expropriate companies for reason of general interest and had to pay the indemnification according to a fiscal cost in a period of 10 years. Next slide, please. Okay. So later, the syndicate of the oil workers demanded an increase of their salaries, and the companies denied. So the case was taken to the Conciliation and Arbitration Board. And after studying the case, the board supported the workers and demanded an increase that made their salaries, to be made. And the companies denied, and they resorted to the Supreme Court of Nations to vouch them. And okay, they say like, no, we are not gonna like protect you. So they rejected it, and they were forced to pay the increase immediately. And next slide, please. So a group of representatives of the companies, along with the U.S. Ambassador Josephus Daniels, had an interview meeting with the president in order to negotiate a solution. And since there were no solution, next slide, please. Okay, since there were no solution, in March 18 of 1938, Lázaro Cárdenas made one of the most important decisions, and he expropriated the oil companies. With this decision, perdón, with this decision, the Mexican government fulfilled that which was established in Article 27, and this led to oil becoming a symbol of national identity and Mexican independence in the face of foreign powers. So the expropriated companies were angry, and they tried to reverse the decision since they saw it as a non-constitutional, and they tried to pressure the suspending of Mexican of the purchasing of Mexican, oil, and that nobody in the market actually buy from Pemex. So this affected the national economy and had some troubles for the oil company. So mm, the pressure put President Cardenas to refuse to reject some protest notes that were from Great Britain and United States because they, in Great Britain protested questioning the reason from the expropriation and said that it was only beneficial for one group. And the United States, there were two opinions, like the one from President President Roosevelt and his ambassador in Mexico, Josephus Daniels, and which was, can you go back to the next slide, please? No, to the last slide. Okay, so okay, I will just keep going. So it was two sides in the United States, and the other one was led by Gordon Hull, who was the Secretary of the State, and he did not support the decision, and he actually helped the companies to try to recover their help the businessmen to recover their companies. So to in response to all this pressure, Lázaro Cárdenas defended the expropriation and in the diplomatic fund, and he denied all the hints and refused to allow the expropriation to be overseen by a third party. And in order to help economy later, Mexico started selling oil to Germany, Italy, and Japan, countries which it did not share ideologies, like Mexico was neutral. And with this pragmatic action, Lázaro Cárdenas put forward the national interest, put aside it, and in order to defend and develop the oil sector. And that would be it for my part. Thank you.
Well, now we have Mexico during the Spanish Civil War. In this time, Mexico lost some of its neutrality. Although Mexico, in almost all international conflicts, assumed a neutral position, the case of the Spanish Civil War was the exception. Even several countries agreed that Mexico wasn't acting with neutrality. Mexico declared in the League of Nations that Spain was the victim of external aggression and that Spain had the right to moral and diplomatic support from the international community. So Mexico lost his neutrality because Lázaro Cárdenas knew that if the Spanish rebels overthrew the legitimate government supported by the Nazi fascists, then Germany and Italy would have no obstacles later. Mexico was the only Latin American country that supported the Republicans, and Mexico sent weapons to Spanish Republicans and ordered his representatives in France to buy military equipment with Spanish money and bring it into Spain through third parties. Lázaro Cárdenas initiated a policy by which Mexico will increase its international prestige and became a pillar of the practice, the political asylum policy, in which Mexico received 480 children from the Civil War, and in total, it is estimated that Mexico received between 20,000 and 30,000 Spanish refugees. Next slide.
Okay, so this is my part. Lázaro Cárdenas, in the beginning of the Second World War, well, he knew that before the beginning of the Second World War, the situation in Europe was really heavy. So the Mexican government disagreed with the Japanese, German, and Italian attacks and invasions. For example, the annexation of Austria and Czechoslovakia. And also, as a member of the League of Nations, Mexico supported Ethiopia against the Italian invasion. And Mexico was the only country that was against. But then he convinced the other countries, and now Ethiopia is like an independent state. And a fun fact is that actually in Ciudad de Mexico, there is a plaza called Ethiopia and metro station because of that. And then in the 4th of September of 1939, Mexico declared neutrality in the war. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, can you guys hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, now I'm gonna talk about the inter-American reunions and why they were important. ¿Todo bien? Okay, so due to the graveness of the Second World War, this had a significant impact on the changes of interest of the US because they wanted to implement this sort of mechanism to create an
Hello,
alliance.
you guys. I'm sorry that I interrupt. I think that before continuing onto the next part of your presentation, which I assume talks about the sexenio of Miguel Alemán, I'm sorry. I would like to point out a few things about Lázaro Cárdenas, okay? So first, Lázaro Cárdenas, as you guys know, became the president that ended with Maximato. I think that you guys know this. We talked about this at some point last class, or over the last classes, right? And so Lázaro Cárdenas became the president that recovered, so to speak, okay, the national interest. If before we talked about how Álvaro Obregón was very pragmatic, and it seemed like he, rather than put the national interest up front, he chose, right, to play by a group interest in this case, right? It nevertheless it got the U.S. Recognition. Still, the national interest was not necessarily the first priority. With Lázaro Cárdenas, this changed. However, and although we think of Lázaro Cárdenas as the one that nationalized the oil industry, he nationalized many things. Okay, he nationalized the railways. He nationalized certain lands. He basically took lands from foreigners, and then he divided those lands, and he pretty much gave them to the peasants, and this gave him a lot of legitimacy within the territory, right? That's one thing to say about Lázaro Cárdenas. Now, Lázaro Cárdenas knew, as the girls were saying in their presentation, he knew that the US would be under a lot of pressure because of the imminent war that was coming in Europe. And although the US initially decided not to intervene, US interests in Europe, of course, were also important. And so I think that Lázaro Cárdenas saw this coming, right? And he knew that there was a lot of pressure on the US as well. And he decided to go on to nationalizing the oil. Now, why do you guys think that he was able to do something that his predecessor was not able to do? What were the internal factors and the external factors that allowed Lázaro Cárdenas to go for it? What do you guys think? Because this is important. I think that this is because it's so close in time also. So I think that if we use this logic of internal and external factors to analyze why this happened, I think we might be able to come up with a pretty good idea of why he did this. So, are there any thoughts? Would anybody like to comment on that? What do you guys think? For some reason, I can't see the. Hold on. Okay, Yareli, what do you think?
I think one of the external factors was that all the countries were focused in World War II, so there wasn't like a major. Sorry for the sound. There wasn't a major like how can I say this? they didn't care a lot for what Mexico was doing at the moment, so they were more focusing what were the repercussions of what were happening during the war, but not exactly Mexico because they were neutral.
Okay, so you think that the war, well, I mean, the Europeans were not really interested in what Mexico was doing. That would be one of your conclusions.
Yes, because they were
All
more
right.
and on other things.
Yeah, well, they were more involved in other things, definitely. I think that Europe at the time was not really interested at all in what was going on in all of Latin America, right? Of course, that's not the case with the U.S. The U.S. has a different feeling about the Latin American countries. But yeah, it's true. I mean, at the time, the tensions in Europe wouldn't allow them to actually be aware or interested of what's going on in Latin America. Okay, so that's one external factor. Would anybody like to try to identify any other external or internal factor that allowed Lázaro Cárdenas to go into the expropriation? Yes, Francisco?
I think the control of of the unions inside the country can be counted as an internal factor, and the
Right.
fact that Lázaro Cárdenas was like sort of the president that not that unified, but that sort of modernized the pre, like the structure or the way in which it was internally organized, and how it was tied with the government, the amount of power that the president wielded back then after
Mhm.
1938. I think it was a very important factor, so that he could nationalize the oil industry.
Thank you, Francisco. Yeah, I would like to build on what Francisco has said. Lázaro Cárdenas also was known for, and I'm going to quote unquote, radicalize, okay, the Mexican government. And what I mean is that he took a lot of socialist and even Marxist ideas, and he was seen as a left wing president. He built the basis of what pre became after the 40s. He built corporativism or corporativismo as we know it in Spanish, which basically means that he supported um, the unions, okay, and he even supported the creation of other unions. And the fact that all of these workers unions became so powerful because of the support that Lázaro Cárdenas gave them, that's what kept PRI going on for over 50, 60 years more. um, I'm sorry. And so you have Croc, CTM, all of these unions that aligned with the president. Now, he did have some disagreements with some of the Marxist leaders. One of them was Vicente Toledano. Vicente Toledano is a really important um, Marxist leader in Mexico that at some point had a disagreement with Lázaro Cárdenas, but then Lázaro negotiated with them. Now, Lázaro was not necessarily an idealist president. He was also pragmatic, but he was he was also very smart to first control the internal factors, and then not only not only with the population and economic growth and all those kind of things, but also with the unions. And the fact that he controlled the unions and the unions supported them within the country also helped him make the decision. This is an important internal factor that allowed Lázaro to have enough strength into nationalizing the oil industry. That's one thing. Also, he managed to get all of the population on his side by moving them through a wide, strong campaign for the nationalization of the oil. If you guys look for YouTube videos of Lázaro Cárdenas giving a speech to the people about the importance of nationalizing the oil industry, and then you can find also videos of the people bringing everything they can to the government so that they can gather enough money to pay the repairs for the oil companies. And there you can see people who are, taking jewelry, or people who are taking their farm animals, children giving money to the government. I mean, it's really amazing what he achieved internally, right? So he was strong enough within the country to get support and nationalize the old country. And he had enough support in just the case that the Americans would resist, right? So that would be an internal factor. Would anybody like to? Yes, Luis Mauricio. Go ahead.
Yeah, teacher, like for example, right now I'm seeing that he was actually a general, and after his 6 years as president, he was actually the Secretary of National Defense and War and Marine. So I was gonna ask you, why did he like initially condemn the actions from other countries, like in the international system, from being or occupying, for example, Austrian Czechoslovakia, when
Yeah.
our own doctrine doesn't like allow that? But I think like he was like a type of more radical president, which sought to have maybe military intervention, but knew the capabilities of her country. I'm not sure if
I
you know anything about that.
I know that Lazaro was radical, and I know that he after his presidency, although he in the beginning he did, because he proposed Miguel Alemán as his successor, and I know that he later criticized um, a lot of the things that Miguel Alemán and then other successors did. I think that Lázaro wasn't necessarily, as I was saying before, an idealist. I think he was very pragmatic. I think that he was also very Republican, and I think that we can see that with what he did with the Civil War in Spain, which is, please remind me not to forget to explain that. And I think that he also led by sort of his radical ideology at times. In the book, it's really interesting how they talk about him putting national interest before his ideology, which I believe he did at the time with the nationalization of the oil industry. Um, but I also think that he had certain affinity for uh, for like left wing ideologies. Um, I don't think he was criticized for not by some Latin American countries for helping Spain. I think that's what you mean. I think that's your question. When he decided to support the Republican government in Spain, you guys know that the Civil War happened from 36 to 39, right? He decided to help first to express support, public support for the Republicans, which was one of the sides of the Spanish Civil War. Okay, the Spanish Civil War had two sides: the Republicans, which is the ones that Lazarus supported, and then on the other side they had the fascist side, which was the government of Franco. Uh, and he decided to support publicly the Republican side. And this allowed Mexico to give certain, not only public support, like opinion, but also some economic support and weaponry. And he sent aid through France. And he also received a lot of Republicans in Mexico. He gave them um, I forgot the word, asylum, I guess. And so he was criticized by the Latin Americans. Why can you not uphold to your doctrina Estrada, and you are helping Spain? And his response would be that he could not, like, his ideals, like the Mexican identity in a whole, could not allow or wouldn't agree with the expansionism of the fascist ideas throughout all of Europe. And I think that he regarded Spain as being too close to Mexico to allow the expansion of the triumph of fascism in that country, because the the relation or the links that there are between Mexico and Spain are so strong. Of course, that you would say, well, this is not necessarily coherent, because when he nationalized the oil industry, he started having trade with fascist governments such as Germany, right, at the time. I think that this has to do with what he regarded Spain, or how he regarded Spain. And also the fact that there are so many um, cultural and social links between both countries. If there was a problem, a strong problem in Spain, would affect the internal, the domestic stability. And this kind of, like, maybe it's not exactly the same, but it reminds me of what happens with the US in the First World War, and then also in the Second World War. In the First World War, when the US didn't want to um, when they didn't want to go into the war, they were afraid that the nationalisms in Europe would emerge in the US as well, and that the intervention of the US in the conflict would create a domestic conflict. It's not. I say that it's not necessarily exactly the same, because I don't think that Lázaro expected at all to be a domestic confrontation because of nationalism. However, the links and the people, the amount of Spanish immigrants that there are in Mexico, like history, do, in my opinion, did play an important part in the decision of Lázaro Cárdenas to support the Republicans. Some authors think of Latin America not as Latin America, but as Iberoamerica, which include the quote unquote motherland, right? Spain. And so I think he did have some. His decision was influenced by this view. Now he decided to, as I was saying, he decided to side with the Republicans. The Republicans were the left wing side of the conflict, of the civil war that happened in Spain, and the Republicans lost this war in part because Franco allowed the Nazis to make rehearsals with bombs and other weaponry in Spain, and attacking the Republicans. And this is one of the arguments that Lázaro Cárdenas used as well when he made public that he would support the Republicans. Lázaro Cárdenas even has a statue in Madrid. There's a statue of Lázaro, and they love him for, having supported the Republicans. There's a famous case, I'm sorry, of Lázaro Cárdenas supporting the arrival of orphans of the Spanish War. They're called Los Niños de Morelia. And he received this group of children and gave them a home. Well, they gave them a roof, right? They gave them everything they needed to survive up until they were 18 years old, and they were able to go into the world by themselves. So that's why he was criticized, because um, he did not seem to, at the time, by making this public intervention for the Republicans, he did not seem to respect his own doctrine. So yeah, that that's why he was also criticized. I don't know if anybody else has a question or a comment, you guys. No? Okay. So let's go into the second part of the presentation, which is now that, after 40, by 1940, Lázaro Cárdenas, you guys know that the PRI always had this tradition of supporting the next successor, right? Of appointing the next successor and supporting the next successor. So in this case, it was Miguel Alemán. Um, Miguel Alemán Valdés he was one of the youngest of the candidates, and Lázaro appointed him because he was not so radical in his thinking, and he seemed to have enough economic knowledge to go into the task of becoming his successor. So you guys from the team, please go ahead with Lázaro Cárdenas. I'm sorry, with uh, Miguel Alemán. Please.
Okay, so like I was saying, due to the graveness of the Second World War, the White House had already been thinking about the necessity to create this union with the Latin American countries to be able to protect themselves from any Nazi fascist influence or threat. So the US urged Mexico to join in, and we did. And to that security agreement, we know it as the Inter-American System. So after Mexico joined in, it became sort of like an important participator, and later on, they gave us the title of the regional leader. Some of the participations most renowned during these reunions was the Conference of Chapultepec in 1945, which was hosted in Mexico City in the Castle of Chapultepec. And in this special reunion, the members discussed the issues related to the end of the war and the possible consequences. Later on, we see as well the role of Mexico in the San Francisco Conference, which was sort of like the basis that gave birth to the UN. And here we also see some of Mexico's point of view being adopted, such as not including Franco's regime in this newly formed organization, and also to promote the cooperation between the regional organisms in the UN. And finally, we also see figures like Eduardo Sanchez, the Secretary of Finance at the time, having also an important role in the creation of the financial international system and the Bretton Woods Agreement.
Well, we had the international negotiations during World War II. Well, thanks to the Second World War and to the union of the internal and external factors, and led for the first time in Mexico history to increase their negotiation capacity in a drastic way. And by the year of 1940, Mexico showed an internal strength. Next one, please. Well, by all the situation that was happening, Mexico showed a lot of changes. In one way, the nation started to enjoy better politics in their internal governments. Thanks to institutionalization of a better system, the politics inside of Mexico, instead of changing in like a chaotic way, they began to change like in a pacific way. But in the other hand, Mexico began to experience an accelerated economic advance as a result of the new laws implemented in the beginning of the Second World War.
All the situation that was occurring around the globe and the constant conflict that was created by the Nazis in certain way helped or was favorable to Mexico as United States needed desperately for an inter-American union for protecting us and them of an like a Nazi ideology. And by the year of 1940 was the year when it was recorded as the year when Mexico had just like a few foreign investments as it was saw in 1935. An inversion estimated around 1,083 millions of dollars in comparison to 1940 that it nearly reached 419 million of dollars. This means that it had a reduction of the 42% of the investment. This was made mostly because of the Cardenas, mainly, excuse me, because of the Cardenas reforms. Uh, in fact, it was mainly because of the agricultural and oil expropriation. Agriculture and oil expropriation. Next one, please.
Okay. So for the U.S. to be able to make sure they had this support from Mexico, they had to first um, give solution to their previous disagreements they had derived from the oil expropriation and all that stuff. So Mexico agreed, but it had a few terms and conditions. The first was, like I said, set these issues they had from the expropriation and also remove the barriers from the silver purchases and forgive the compensations they wanted and other complaints. Also, we also wanted the renegotiation of the external debt, which was reduced by 10%. And we also signed the Resettle Treaty, which allowed Mexican workers to work in the U.S. legally. I'm so sorry for the noise. So yeah. And well, this agreement also guaranteed decent living conditions for those Mexican workers, such as sanitation, adequate shelter, and food.
Well, in the bilateral political scope, Mexico showed like an autonomy with its relations with other countries. One example is that Mexico resumed the relations with Great Britain without them demanding immediately the solution for the oil problem. Also with France, Mexico was the first country to recognize the Gulf. The multilateral policy that Mexico took in the international forums gave our country like a sort of prestige around the international system. The constant activity and participation positioned it like a regional leader in the country where almost all the initiatives proposed were approved without any questioning in the frame of the consultation meetings. This prestige that was acquired by the country led the nation a sort of advantages at the moment of negotiation with the exterior. The most important principles of the foreign policy were established in the Declaration of Mexico and also in the Act of Chapultepec. The United States adopt some points of view of Mexico, as we already said. Next one, please.
So lastly, to conclude, we can say that Mexico's external policy during World War II was characterized by a constant observation of international law, inter-American solidarity, and an unyielding refusal of Nazi fascist ideologies. Mexico was one of the countries that truly rallied for inter-American cooperation, always in solidarity with the nations most affected by the war and condemning the use of force. These attitudes were undertaken as a result of the international threat that the Nazi advances represented, and as a way of ensuring the defense of national sovereignty, territorial integrity, and national independence. And that would be all for our presentation.
Thank you, guys. So now you're gonna present the video. Okay, go ahead. Remember that when you share a video, when you click on the little arrow to share things, you have to then click on this small box that says share the audio of the system. Compartir audio del sistema. So I think that you would have to open that on YouTube literally, and then click when you share the screen, you have to click on incluir audio del sistema. Okay. Try.
Les voy a hablar de
¿Se
la
está
vida de
escuchando?
Cárdenas.
Yes, we are. Go ahead.
I don't think we're listening to the video.
No, we're not. Actually.
Bueno, voy a volver a intentar.
Sí. Deja de compartir al lado donde está la tachita, dale clic y luego cuando le des clic, dale clic. Y luego, cuando le vuelvas a dar clic, del lado superior izquierdo, donde te salen todas las opciones, le das clic a donde diga incluir audio del sistema. O sea, le vuelves a dar a la flechita como si fueras a compartir y ya es que te salen todas las ventanitas que tienes abiertas y ahí tú seleccionas cuál. Antes de seleccionar la ventanita, del lado izquierdo hay como un checkbox que dice incluir audio del sistema.
No me aparece.
¿Segura?
Ay. No, nomás me parece que mi pantalla. A ver.
Pero es una leyenda que viene arriba de todas las pantallitas que dice incluir audio del sistema.
Ok.
¿No?
Es que también estoy en Chrome. Déjeme, voy a abrir
A
la
ver,
aplicación de Teams para ver si ahí
si
sí.
quieres, a ver, si quieres pasa
El link.
El link.
pasa el link del video al chat, por favor.
¿Usted va a poner el video, doctora? ¿O quiere que alguien
Sí.
lo ponga? Ok. Va.
Bueno, si tú me puedes ayudar, mejor.
Ok.
O sea, ¿quién es? ¿Marcelo va?
Sí.
Sí, tú me puedes ayudar, mejor. ¿Sí sabes cómo?
Sí. Bueno, espero.
Ok.
No quiero quedar mal, pero sí.
Bueno,
Sí,
si
yo creo
no
que sí.
puedes, ya me dices, muy bien. Ahí sigues, Mariana.
Sí, aquí está, ya me pasó ya me pasó.
Ah,
Pensé que le iba a pasar por aquí, pero me lo pasó por Juan. Entonces,
bueno, ya, muy bien. Ok.
déjame nomás encontrar, aquí está. Ay, pero no le di, a ver, espérame. Ah. Mm. Ahí se ve.
Ya lo vemos. A ver, ponle play.
Ok.
Ahí está. Muy bien.
Hola a todos, los saluda de nuevo su amigo Calceto el Calcetín. El día de hoy les voy a hablar sobre un tema llamado el cardenismo. Se llama así por Lázaro Cárdenas, pero no les voy a hablar de la vida de Cárdenas, sino únicamente del periodo en el que él nos gobernó, es decir, de 1934 a 1940. Trataré de tomar las características principales de su gobierno, empezando por la siguiente. Creó algo denominado Plan Sexenal, que lo que buscaba era distanciarse de las políticas del presidente anterior, es decir, de Plutarco Elías Calles. Se le llama sexenal porque fue el primer gobierno que duró 6 años. La segunda característica tiene que ver con partidos políticos. Antes de que Lázaro Cárdenas llegara a la presidencia, el único partido que existía era el PNR, o Partido Nacional Revolucionario. Cuando Lázaro Cárdenas llega a la presidencia de nuestro país, decide reformarlo y crear el PRM, o Partido de la Revolución Mexicana, que es el antecesor del PRI, Partido Revolucionario Institucional. La tercera característica, y tal vez es la que más recordamos los mexicanos, es la expropiación petrolera, que básicamente es nacionalizar el petróleo. Antes de que Cárdenas llegara a la presidencia de México, el petróleo pertenecía a empresas extranjeras, principalmente estadounidenses y británicas. Cuando Cárdenas se convierte en presidente, decide que este recurso natural se quede completamente en México y las ganancias obtenidas del petróleo se queden aquí, por lo que decide expulsar a estas empresas. Tanto estadounidenses como británicos se enojan con México y deciden tomar represalias por este acto de Lázaro Cárdenas. Afortunadamente, para nosotros los mexicanos y para Lázaro Cárdenas, explota la Segunda Guerra Mundial en 1939. Esto provocó que Estados Unidos y Gran Bretaña se enfocaran en la guerra y olvidaran por un tiempo este tema. La expropiación petrolera dio como resultado la creación de Pemex, que es una de las empresas más importantes hasta nuestros días. La cuarta característica tiene que ver con educación, y esto es la creación del Instituto Politécnico Nacional, IPN. Lo que buscaba Lázaro Cárdenas con la creación de esta escuela es formar ingenieros y técnicos que ayudaran al desarrollo de nuestro país. El IPN se ha convertido en una de las escuelas más importantes de nuestro país y de América Latina. Además de estas 4 características que ya les mencioné, también podemos nombrar las siguientes. La nacionalización del ferrocarril. Además, el aumento de carreteras. También se construyeron escuelas rurales. El reparto de tierras fue fundamental durante este sexenio. Cárdenas también impulsó a la Comisión Federal de Electricidad. Se aceleró la reforma agraria. Y por último, se apoyó a la creación de los sindicatos. El cardenismo fue el primer gobierno que duró 6 años y las ya mencionadas anteriormente fueron, desde mi punto de vista, unas de las características más importantes de este gobierno. Espero, amigos, que les haya sido muy útil esta información. Recuerda que si quieres que hable de algún tema en específico, solo tienes que escribirme. El día de hoy, eso es todo. Les mando un gran saludo. No sin antes decirles que se suscriban y que le den like.
Listo. Ahorita me
Thank you,
suscribo.
Marcelo.
De nada, profe.
So, girls, I don't know, you guys have an activity or do you? The team?
What are you asking? I'm sorry.
Yeah, was asking if you guys have an activity.
Yes, we have a Kahoot.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me go ahead and share it.
So, I'm sorry?
Let me go ahead and share it.
Yes. Share your screen. Okay, are you guys? Uh, mm. Well, thank you and congratulations to Yareli, uh, who won the Kahoot. Yay. So thank you, girls. And I think this was a good presentation, although we was really quick. I think that we did grasp a little bit of how things evolved for
Teacher,
Mexico.
I think that
Yes,
you were going to explain something about the Spanish Civil War.
this I did already, Mariana. Yeah. Um, I did, right? Yes, I did. What was I saying before? All right. And so we did see the evolution of foreign policy from Álvaro Obregón to Lázaro Cárdenas and Miguel Alemán. And I think that we can all agree that foreign policy for during Cárdenas and Alemán was definitely stronger than before. And it has to do with um, the larger control that Mexico had, both internally, but also the position that Mexico took after the 1940s with the World War, and the importance that it took strategically for the U.S. You guys, I think that the girls mentioned it in during the presentation. The U.S. was afraid that Japan would invade its territory through our territory, and so strategically we became even more um, important for the U.S. In the video that the girls shared, also there was something important that was mentioned, which is Lázaro Cárdenas became the first president that lasted 6 years, okay, in the presidency. But also he is the one that implemented uh, uh, the Plan Nacional de Desarrollo. I don't remember if I already talked to you guys about this. If I did, please tell me so. But Plan Nacional de Desarrollo is the document in which Mexican foreign policy today is expressed. So if you go to the current Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, you will find the most important aspects of Mexican foreign policy, for example, in this case, of Andres Manuel López Obrador, right? And so it was from Lázaro Cárdenas that every president has come up with his own Plan Nacional de Desarrollo, where they express the importance, I mean, the lines or the most important basis of the Mexican foreign policy at the time. Before we go, I don't know if you guys have any question or anything you would like to comment.
I want to mention that also support the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War. So that's interesting because even though that Mexico was ideological, the same, well, as United States, they supported Spain.
Yes, so we did talk about that, right? Well, I did. Yes, it's true. In that sense, in the Spanish War, Mexico supported the Republicans. Are there any other questions, you guys? comments? No? Okay, great. So I guess I'll see
I
you.
do.
Yeah,
Me, I have
go
a
ahead.
question.
Just
Okay.
remember to raise the hand, right? But yes, go
Oh,
ahead.
yeah, I'm sorry. I don't quite understand yet what the term expropriation means.
Uh-huh.
I asked to my classmates and they were trying to explain to me what it was, but I don't actually get it yet.
Well, expropriation is basically nationalizing something. In the case of the resources, okay, in this case, specifically the oil, although being a national resource, right, it's a natural resource that is within the borders of our territory, okay, it was exploited by other companies, foreign companies, and these foreign companies would bring in technology, exploit those natural resources, sell the natural resources, and keep the revenues, right? The expropriation basically means that Lázaro Cárdenas, through the implementation of Article 27, okay, he would declare those natural resources as only national, which means no other company can own those natural resources, okay, just Mexico. And so he took those natural resources from them. Okay, so those companies were not allowed to exploit it anymore, and they couldn't sell it anymore because this is a national resource. And so, in taking those resources from them, he is expropriating those resources. And since Lázaro took basically those resources from them, he had to commit to repair the damage that was done to the investment of those foreign companies. That was the big challenge. It was not just about going in and uh, making the British and the Americans go away. It's the fact that they had invested things here. Now, of course, they were going to defend their own interests, and that's why Lázaro negotiated a repair package for them. So expropriation is again nationalizing, is um, prohibiting foreign companies or foreign investors to own and exploit the natural resources, which by Article 27 became national resources. The same with the railways, okay? What with the expropriation of the railways, all of the private companies that owned and operated the railways had to go away, had to get away of that business because it became a national business. However, there were repairs to be done to those companies. So expropriation is nationalizing resources, taking the resources from of private hands and putting those resources in the national hands. I don't know if I explained myself.
Yes, but if the people or the foreigners that were in charge or had business within the oil, so Lázaro Cárdenas had to pay something back to them, right? As you say.
Yes, those are called indemnizaciones. Yeah, it's true. And that is why I was telling you guys, if you go on the online and you look for videos of people giving money to Lazarus so he can gather enough money to repair to pay those repairs to the Americans, it's really interesting because of course that money would have to come from taxes and they would have to pay that debt, right? That's how the negotiation went on. Is that a little better?
Yes, thank you so much.
Yes, you're welcome. Alrighty, you guys. So if there are no other questions, I guess I will see you next class. Okay?
Thank you, teacher. Have a nice day.
Thank
Thank you.
you. Thank you, teacher.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. Bye.
Thank you, teacher.
Bye.